Good evening. Stab the Dragon Productions here with a book review. Columbus by Felipe Fernandez-Armesto out of Oxford University Press. Read this this year from January to April. This is an excellent, interesting, thorough, and a bit tough read for sure. But overall, an amazing book. Now, in the last 20 years, I've read a couple of other biographies on Columbus. I've read Admiral of the Ocean Sea, A Life of Christopher Columbus by Admiral Samuel Eliot Morison. Dr. Morison was a professor of Harvard, but he was also in the Navy, and he wrote like a 15-volume history of naval operations of World War II for the Department of the Navy. Morison's just one of my favorite scholars. He's done a lot. And this book, in its 2-volume edition in 1942, did win the Pulitzer Prize. This is the condensed 1-volume edition. But this is a fantastic read. And then the other biography of Columbus that I've read is this one by Carol Delaney, Columbus and the Quest for Jerusalem, How Religion Drove the Voyages That Led to America. Carol Delaney. And Delaney had a divinity degree from Harvard Divinity School and a PhD in cultural anthropology from the University of Chicago. And she's a graduate of Boston U. So, this was another fantastic biography of Columbus. But I've long known of Fernandez-Armesto. He's another Oxford scholar, I think, here. Let me see. Yeah, he's worked with Oxford some, but at any rate, this is a book. I want to do a book review. I haven't done a book review in decades probably. So this is not going to be real professional. This is or academic. This is just, I read a book, I enjoyed it, so I want to talk to you about it. I've also read Robert Fuson's translation of the log of Christopher Columbus. Don't have that around here with me at the moment, but that was an excellent read as well. But, there's some source criticism of that book. Where did the log of Christopher Columbus actually come from? It's a copy of a copy of a copy, translation of a translation of a translation. So how much of it is accurate? I don't know. I think it's reasonably accurate, and so it's a good primary source, but with problems. And then also this year I've read this book, The Enemies of Christopher Columbus by Thomas Bowden. Now, Bowden is an attorney, and he actually works with, I think, I don't remember what's called, the Ayn Rand Institute or something, but he's big in the Ayn Rand Society. And this book was fantastic as well. So why all these books on Columbus? Well, I've long been fascinated with Columbus ever since I was a kid, and I'm actually, working on, if you've watched any of my sermons that I'm doing from Chronicles, I've mentioned the fact that I'm doing kind of a big study of history from a Christian point of view, trying to do a theological interpretation of American history. So that's the big picture of what I'm doing. But now on to Felipe Fernandez-Armesto and his book on Columbus here. The opening line is this: considered from one point of view, Columbus was a crank. Now, from this opening sentence in the preface, you get the idea that Armesto is pursuing a negative emotional agenda against Columbus. That's only partially true. I found this book to be very fair and balanced, actually, stacked with evidence upon evidence on the personality quirks, the character flaws, the brilliance, and the good luck of Columbus. While it is certainly true that you can come away from this book knowing that Armesto doesn't much like Columbus, I don't think. You also come away knowing Armesto respects Columbus, respects what Columbus achieved. Armesto thinks that while Columbus was religious, he also bordered on being crazy and a bit eccentric, perhaps. However, at no point does Armesto descend into the petty hatreds of a lot of the current critics of Columbus, not in the least. He gives the most solid background of all the biographies on Columbus that I've read. Now, Morrison portrays Columbus as the consummate sailor and explorer. Delaney really focuses positively on the faith of Columbus, but Armesto, he critiques that faith in a pretty clear psychological way and gives quite a bit of evidence to back up his thoughts. But Armesto does not disparage the sailing skills or accomplishments of Columbus. He gives him credit where credit is due. The biggest critique of Columbus in recent decades concerns his treatment of the Indians. And here, Armesto shines as he goes into detail, showing where Columbus was wrong, yes, where he did what we would not approve of, where he was not so wrong also, and where the complexities of the Spanish history of colonization and conquest and the Spanish system and the encomienda led to abuses by those who followed Columbus. So he makes it clear that Columbus was not an administrator, that he was a man of his times. And boy, he gives an extensive background of Spain and Spain's prior wars with clearing out Muslims from Spain, and how that created a certain, almost a caste in Spain of conquistadors. Really, that's kind of where the whole idea of Reconquista came from, and then they carried that over into the New World, and then how they treated the people in the islands that they colonized. I mean, he gives an extensive background here. So it really shed light on the criticism of Columbus. Well, he wanted to enslave the Indians. Well, it's not that simple. But he shows that Columbus, though not an administrator, was a consummate explorer. One of the main strengths of the book is that extensive background that Armesto gives on the role of Genoa. Now, I've known that Columbus came from Genoa, but I mean, he was a weaver's son, and I just kind of thought, well, he left home and he went into sailing, and there you go. No, Genoa had its colonies, business colonies everywhere, not just in the Mediterranean and the Black Sea, but on the Atlantic coast as well, down around Africa, and then the islands there. So Genoa, there was a lot of Genoese that worked for Portugal, that worked for Spain, and so, man, they were everywhere. And so Armesto gives that kind of an in-depth background, and man, that just blew me away. It was very eye-opening. If I had to recommend just one biography to read about Columbus, for years, it was this one by Morrison. For years. I mean, this is Pulitzer Prize winning stuff. But, for reading pleasure and joy of discovery, I'm still going to recommend Morrison over Armesto. However, if I was speaking to a student who was seriously studying Columbus, I would recommend Armesto first. I think Armesto gives the much better cultural, historical background for Columbus. Now, if I was speaking to a student who was interested in the place of the Christian faith in the discovery and development of America, I would absolutely go with Delaney here. So, Armesto lacks the passion and the sailing knowledge that Morrison has. He's kind of maybe anti-religious is too strong, but he's at least skeptical, and he really seeks to psychoanalyze Columbus. So he doesn't have that exuberance of Morrison. He doesn't have the faith of Delaney, but he's the most well-reasoned, well-rounded, in-depth biography. He deals with the major problems of Columbus in our culture as well. So to understand and appreciate such a huge figure in our history, I really think it takes all three, because Columbus merits that. Uh, the all the hoo-ha in the last 20 years or so, probably going back 30 years, 1992, all the negative hoo-ha that's come out against Columbus, the toppling of the statues and all that, really needs to be addressed in a logical, historical manner. And these three books would do that. Now I want to just read some passages, some short passages here from Armesto's book to give you a flavor of it. Now, he talks about how Columbus had this theory of a narrow Atlantic, or a smaller world and a narrow Atlantic. So this is what he writes. The theory of a narrow Atlantic was cultivated in the circle of the Florentine cosmographer Paolo del Pozzo Toscanelli, whose views were expressed in a letter dated June of 1474, addressed via a canon of Lisbon to the Portuguese king, and in a subsequent recapitulation of uncertain authenticity addressed to Columbus. Toscanelli estimated the distance from the Canaries to Cathay, Cathay meaning China, to be about 5,000 nautical miles, not quite navigable by the standards of the time, but the journey might, he thought, be broken at Antillia, the mythical island of Portuguese tradition, or at Japan, which on Marco Polo's authority was thought to lie at a huge distance from China. As copies of the Toscanelli correspondence survive in Columbus's hand, bound into the end papers of one of his books, there can be no reasonable doubt of his awareness of these views. So there you go. That was eye-opening, right there. That's where he got his ideas, or at least they shared similar ideas. Here's another passage. Columbus did seek support in Portugal for an attempted Atlantic crossing in 1484. It's surprising that it was rejected. Only 3 years later, a Flemish adventurer, Ferdinand van Ulmen, received a commission from Portugal for what seems to have been a closely similar project to find islands and mainland in the Atlantic Ocean. To judge from the frequency with which such documents occur in Portuguese archives, commissions to explore were easy to come by. 8 survive from between 1462 and 1487. The committee of professional savants who sat in judgment on his plans rejected them because they disbelieved in the existence of Cipangu, that's Japan, that Marco Polo mentioned. And Columbus, in any case, demanded excessive rewards for his services in the event of success. Columbus's own explanation, advanced later with the advantages of hindsight and the exaltation of a divine conviction, was that God had occluded the King of Portugal's vision in order to reserve the glory of the discovery for Castile. Divine plans mature slowly. In this case, certainly, God seems to have been in no hurry. So you notice that just a little bit of a jab there. When from his disappointment in Portugal, Columbus transferred his frustrations to Castile, he still had those 6 or 7 years of waiting ahead of him, checkered with moments of despair before he at last obtained a royal commission. Here's another one. About 17 years later, long after Columbus had made his last voyage over the Sea of Death, a young Spaniard, noble both by nature and blood, who had settled successfully in the New World, discovered by Columbus, sat listening to the heated preaching of a Dominican in the city of Santo Domingo, founded by Columbus to be the effective capital of the Spanish New World of the day. Bartolome de las Casas, according to his own recollection of the event, experienced as he listened a sudden revelation. He found himself sharing the friar's outrage at the corrupt lives of the colonists and their ruthless exploitation of the wretched natives. He became convinced that God had ordained the discovery only so that the Indians should be able to hear his word preached. Las Casas devoted the rest of his energetic and ineffective life to his conviction, becoming a lobbyist at court for Indians' rights and at intervals a rather unsuccessful pastor in the field in the New World, struggling to liberate and hallow the lives of Indians already under Spanish rule and to promote the evangelization of others. Now, notice twice in that paragraph, Armesto kind of made a dig at Las Casas for being ineffective and, uh, you know, unsuccessful. Man, I've read Las Casas' book, History of the Indies, the one volume edition. He's got a much bigger edition. This is the condensation. And it was powerful. Now, was it exaggerated at points? I think so. All throughout, I think there's some exaggerations. But Las Casas played a key role. I mean, he really defended the rights of Indians, and he did make an impact that was felt. He and others. I mean, he wasn't the lone voice. So Las Casas also viewed Columbus as a friend. He personally knew Columbus. He was a young man when he met Columbus, and he actually appreciated Columbus's faith and his hard work, and he criticized him some too. So Las Casas, he gave kind of a fair treatment to Columbus. But again, Armesto's little digs about religious faith are coming out here, I think. Another quote, this is about Columbus's third crossing and what he believed here. Within a few days of finding the mainland of America, Columbus had therefore correctly assessed its nature. Though he clearly underestimated, and underestimated grossly, its distance from Asia, he unequivocally expressed the distinction between Asia and the land he had found. He had not, of course, proved that the land was new. Such proof was still not available until the discovery of the Bering Strait more than 200 years later. But Columbus had rested his credentials as the discoverer of America on a firm basis. Not only had he been the first to find that continent in the course of a conscious labor of exploration and to record the find, but he had also appreciated and articulated his achievement. It is an error to think of Columbus' discovery as fortuitous, or to give the credit for first understanding its nature to any later explorer. Columbus had, in a sense, been beaten to the correct conclusion about his discoveries by scholars like Peter Martyr, who had classified them as antipodean from the first. But theirs had been theoretical conjectures based on a realistic calculation of the size of the globe. By finding the mainland and producing evidence that the New World included an unknown continent, Columbus had turned the speculations into empirically verifiable facts. Columbus's scientific breakthrough, and it's not excessive to call it that, was known in his time and quoted by early biographies. Although over the next 10 years, Vespucci, Waldseemüller, and others adopted it or arrived at it to some extent independently and helped to make it generally known and accepted, Columbus was, in an unequivocal sense, its originator. And here he's kind of talking of Columbus's faith a little bit. If, however, there was one single decisive influence, it has to be sought in Columbus's tendency to use religion as a refuge. He darted into the haven of religious experience whenever the storms of life threatened. His relationship with God became a substitute for his unsatisfactory human relationships. His path to heaven was picked out among the debris of his many shattered friendships. Glib about the love of God, he barely ever mentioned his wife or mistress. His trust in God contrasted with the suspicion and fear inspired by his ubiquitous human enemies. Heavenly companionship was his recourse as a deliberate loner. At times of crisis, he had a celestial voice to talk to rather than a flesh and blood friend. So there again, he goes into some fairly deep sneakers psychological profiling of Columbus, which, you can do that. I mean, historians do that, and, that's fine. Well, that's enough reading from the book, but I just wanted to bring this biography out there. I highly recommend it if anybody is interested in Columbus, because in these days our culture is absolutely trashing and thrashing Columbus, and you need to pick up some books, and I've mentioned several here today, and do some reading. It's a fantastic journey. Well, thank you. This is Stab the Dragon out here.